I saw my future husband before I ever spoke to him, and the worst part wasn't believing it. It was wishing it wasn't true. I didn't come to the end-of-year festival looking for anything, not love, not answers, not a sign. I came because my sister insisted that staying home alone on December 29th was giving the universe the wrong message. I told her the universe and I were no longer on speaking terms. The place was massive, too loud, too alive. Strings of warm lights hung above the crowd like something out of a movie I no longer believed in. Live music drifted through the air, mixing with the smell of fried dough, mulled wine, and something sweet I couldn't name. People laughed easily. Couples leaned into each other without hesitation. It felt like a celebration made for people who still trusted beginnings. I didn't. My name is Clara Bennett. This is a fictional story, but it's told the way it felt, not the way it looked. And what I didn't know that night was that a single careless choice would turn into the most unsettling emotional love story of my life. If you're still here, pause for a second. Subscribe to Possible Hearts if stories about real hearts, real love, and real possibilities speak to you. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, city or country. I read them, all of them. This video was created using artificial intelligence as a creative tool, but every story you hear here is guided, shaped, and emotionally reviewed by a real human being, carefully analyzing each moment, each decision, and each turning point, because behind every possible heart, there is always a human choice. Back to the story. I remember thinking I would leave early, slip out quietly. No one would notice. That was when I saw the stand. It wasn't flashy, no neon sign, just a small wooden booth tucked between a hot chocolate vendor and a woman selling handmade candles. A simple handwritten sign hung above it. I draw the face of the person you'll marry. I laughed, not out loud, internally. The tired kind of laugh you make when something almost offends you, but you're too exhausted to argue. I had been married once, long enough to believe in promises, long enough to stop believing in guarantees. That chapter of my life didn't end in betrayal or drama, just erosion, the quiet kind, the kind that leaves you wondering when you stopped being chosen and started being tolerated. Still, I stepped closer. The artist sat behind the table, older than I expected, gray hair pulled back, calm eyes. He didn't call out, didn't pitch, just watched people pass like he already knew who would stop. I told myself I was doing it ironically, a joke, closure, one last nod to the idea of fate before officially letting it go. "Sure," I said, handing him cash. "Why not?" He studied my face longer than felt polite, not in a creepy way, in a careful way, as if he were memorizing something he might never see again. He didn't ask my name, he didn't smile, he just started drawing. The silence between us was heavy. I could hear the scratch of pencil against paper. Somewhere behind me, a band hit a chorus, and the crowd cheered. None of it touched me. When he finished, he folded the paper once and slid it across the table. "That's it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "That's enough," he replied. I didn't open it right away. I thanked him, walked away, told myself it was just charcoal and coincidence. I finally looked when I reached the edge of the crowd. The drawing wasn't beautiful. It was specific. A man with tired eyes, not sad, restrained, a small scar near his right eyebrow, a mouth that looked like it had learned not to say everything it felt. He didn't look heroic or romantic or ideal. He looked like someone who had loved and lost. My stomach tightened in a way I didn't understand. I folded the paper and slipped it into my coat pocket, annoyed at myself for feeling anything at all. This wasn't destiny. It was a trick, a coincidence, a meaningless exercise designed to pull hope out of people who needed it. I didn't know then that a piece of paper would make me question every choice I was about to make. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw him. Not dramatically, just a deep, immediate discomfort, like recognizing someone you've never met. He stood near the cider stand, hands in his pockets, scanning the crowd as if he were already halfway out the door, and he looked exactly like the drawing. I hadn't believed in fate when I paid for the sketch, but as I stared at him across the crowd, I realized something far more terrifying. What if this wasn't destiny, but a choice I was about to make? I didn't walk toward him, not at first. I stood there, frozen near the edge of the crowd, telling myself this was ridiculous. Faces repeat themselves. Scars aren't rare. Tired eyes are practically a requirement for adulthood. My mind was doing what it always did when something felt too meaningful, dismantling it before it could hurt me. Still, my body betrayed me. He shifted his weight, glanced at his watch, and sighed. The exact expression from the drawing. Not dramatic, just restraint, like someone who had learned not to expect too much from moments. I told myself I wasn't approaching fate. I was approaching a stranger. Long line? I said, nodding toward the cider stand when I finally found myself beside him. He turned, startled for half a second, then offered a polite smile. That's one word for it. His voice was calm, low, not performative. He didn't lean in, didn't scan me the way men sometimes do when they're deciding whether you're interesting enough to impress. He was already tired. I'm Clara, I said. Ethan, he replied. Nice to meet you. Nothing electric happened. No rush. No internal soundtrack. And yet, there it was again, that quiet sense of recognition. Not attraction, familiarity. Like hearing a song you don't remember learning, but somehow know all the words to. We talked about the festival, about how neither of us liked crowds, about how the lights were pretty but overwhelming. Ordinary things, the kind of conversation you have while waiting for something else to happen. Are you here with someone? He asked, not hopeful, not dismissive, just curious. No, I said. You? He shook his head. Just passing through. That should have been my cue to disengage. Passing through people are dangerous. They don't stay long enough to disappoint you properly. They just vanish and leave you wondering what you imagined. So, I said too casually, do you believe in coincidences? He raised an eyebrow. Depends. Are you about to tell me something unsettling? I laughed, then immediately regretted it. I pulled the folded paper from my coat pocket before I could overthink it. I did something stupid. There's this artist over there who draws the face of the person you're supposedly going to marry. Ethan's expression changed instantly. Not confusion, not amusement. Discomfort. That's, he paused, unsettling, not romantic. I know, I said quickly. I didn't take it seriously. It was just, he looked at the paper like it might accuse him of something. I don't like the idea of being someone's outcome, he said quietly. Like I exist to fulfill a prediction. Something in his voice tightened, a defensive edge I hadn't expected. I'm not saying you are, I replied. It was a joke, mostly. He exhaled. I don't believe in destiny. I think it gives people an excuse not to take responsibility for their choices. That landed harder than he probably meant it to, because standing there, I realized something I didn't want to admit. I wasn't uncomfortable because the drawing resembled him. I was uncomfortable because part of me wanted it to mean something. We walked away from the stand together, conversation drifting back into safer territory. Work, weather, how strange it feels to be surrounded by celebration when you don't feel celebratory inside. I used to think love was inevitable. Like if you were good enough, patient enough, it would just work. And now? I asked. And now I think love is something that happens when people stop pretending it's guaranteed. I didn't know how to respond to that. We exchanged numbers before parting ways, neither of us making it a big moment. No promises, no plans, just a quiet acknowledgement that this conversation wasn't finished. I watched him disappear into the crowd, the paper still warm in my hand. That night, lying in bed, I unfolded the drawing again. It looked even more like him now. And for the first time, I asked myself the question that would haunt the weeks to come. Was I drawn to Ethan because of who he was, or because a piece of paper had told me he mattered?
I didn't know then that every step toward Ethan would force me to choose between believing in fate or taking responsibility for my heart. Ethan didn't text me the next day. That shouldn't have bothered me. We had exchanged numbers, not vows. There was no expectation, at least none we'd named. Still, every time my phone lit up, my chest tightened in anticipation before loosening again in disappointment. I told myself this was normal. Early connections are fragile. They flicker. They test your patience without asking permission. 2 days later, he sent a simple message. "Ethan, coffee? No symbolism, just caffeine." I smiled despite myself. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like burnt espresso and old books. No fairy lights, no music, just chipped mugs and quiet conversations that stayed in their own lanes. Ethan was the same as he'd been at the festival, polite, reserved, emotionally economical. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it felt measured, as if every word had passed through a filter of restraint before being released. This wasn't a cinematic romance. It was a realistic relationship story, unfolding in half steps. We talked about our pasts carefully, like people handling glass. I was married, I told him. Not unhappily, just gradually. He nodded. I was engaged once. The way he said it told me everything he wasn't. We started seeing each other sporadically. No schedule, no escalation. Dinners that ended early, walks that lingered just long enough to be memorable, conversations that went deep, then abruptly pulled back into silence. Sometimes he'd reach for my hand, not possessively, but like he was checking if it was still okay to do so. Other times, he'd pull away without explanation, and that's when the doubt crept in. I began to notice how often my thoughts circled back to the drawing, not consciously, not obsessively, just present, like a quiet observer in the room. Was I patient with his distance because I believed this was an unexpected love story meant to unfold slowly, or because I was afraid that questioning it would unravel something I wanted to be true? One night, after a particularly long silence between texts, I finally asked, "Do you ever feel like you're holding back?" I said, as we sat on a park bench under bare winter trees. Ethan stared ahead. "I feel like if I give more than I can sustain, I'll disappear." "That's not how love works," I replied gently. "That's how it worked last time," he said. I didn't push. I wanted to, but I didn't. Instead, I went home and unfolded the drawing again. That's when it started to feel less like a sign and more like a weight, a quiet accusation. You knew this mattered. You can't walk away now. I hated that thought. I didn't want to love because I'd been told to. I wanted to choose love, consciously, imperfectly, without guarantees. And yet, every time Ethan pulled away, fear whispered that walking away would mean defying something already written. That fear changed how I showed up. I became more careful, more accommodating, less honest about what I needed, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted between us. Ethan noticed. "You're not saying what you're thinking anymore," he said one evening, his tone not accusing, just tired. "I am," I lied. "No," he replied. "You're saying what you think will keep me here." The words landed between us like broken glass. That night, after he left, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. The drawing had stopped being a curiosity. It had become a justification. And if I didn't confront that, I would lose something far more important than a man who might never stay. I would lose myself. I didn't know then that my next choice would determine whether this love would grow or collapse under the weight of meaning I never asked for. The first real fight didn't sound like a fight. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, just a careful conversation that went on for too long, like both of us were afraid that if we stopped talking, something fragile would break. It happened on a Thursday, a regular day. That felt important later, how ordinary the moment was when everything started to tilt. I feel like you're waiting for something, Ethan said, sitting across from me at my kitchen table. He hadn't taken off his coat. That should have been my first warning. Waiting for what? I asked. For confirmation, he replied. Like you need a reason to stay that isn't just me. The air went thin. That's not fair, I said. I'm here, aren't I? Yes, he said softly, but you're not present. I wanted to tell him about the drawing, about how it scared me, about how I hated the way it hovered over every choice I made. But I didn't. Instead, I deflected. You're the one who keeps pulling away, I said. You avoid plans. You avoid the future. I avoid guarantees, he corrected. There's a difference. That word again. Guarantees. We sat in silence after that, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between us. It was the kind of silence that doesn't resolve anything. It just confirms what both people already know but aren't ready to say. I don't want to be part of a story where the ending is already decided, even if it's a happy one. My chest tightened, because I was starting to realize something painful. He wasn't afraid of commitment. He was afraid of being chosen for the wrong reason. After that night, things changed. Not dramatically, quietly. Texts became shorter, gaps between seeing each other stretched. When we did meet, there was an invisible tension, like both of us were bracing for something neither of us wanted to initiate. I started questioning everything. Was he distancing himself because he felt my hesitation? Or was I hesitant because he sensed his distance? The line between cause and effect blurred until it didn't matter anymore. One evening, after canceling plans for the third time that week, Ethan finally said it. I think we should take some space. The word landed exactly where I expected it to, and still hurt. Space for what? I asked. For clarity, for honesty, for figuring out whether this is something we're choosing or something we're leaning on. I didn't argue, because deep down I knew he was right. That night, I pulled the drawing out again. I stared at it for a long time, at the tired eyes, the restrained mouth, the scar near the eyebrow. It felt accusatory now, like it was asking me to commit to a narrative I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. I realized then something uncomfortable and necessary. I had been using the idea of fate as protection. If this fell apart, I could tell myself it wasn't my fault. If it worked, I could tell myself it was meant to. Either way, I wouldn't have to own the risk. And love doesn't work like that. Love demands responsibility. I folded the drawing carefully and put it in my bag. The next morning, I went back to the festival grounds. The booths were being dismantled, lights taken down. The place looked smaller in daylight, more honest, more less magical. I found the artist packing his things. Did you know him? I asked, without preamble. The man you drew? He looked at me calmly, too calmly. I don't draw futures, he said. I draw what people are ready to face. That's not an answer, I said. He shrugged. Neither is destiny. I stood there, holding a piece of paper that suddenly felt heavier than any truth I'd avoided, and I understood that no one was going to give me certainty. I was going to have to choose. Without it, I didn't know then whether tearing the drawing would end this story or finally allow it to begin.
I didn't tear the drawing right away. I carried it with me for days, folded carefully in the side pocket of my bag, like something fragile I wasn't ready to break. Every time my fingers brushed against the paper, I felt the same mix of resentment and comfort. Certainty is addictive, even false certainty. Ethan and I didn't speak, not because we had agreed not to, but because neither of us knew what to say that wouldn't sound like an accusation or a plea. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument we'd had. I kept replaying our conversations in my head, searching for the moment where things could have gone differently, where I could have chosen presence over protection, where I could have said, "I'm here because I want to be, not because I'm afraid to walk away." But hindsight is generous in ways real time is not. One evening, I finally unfolded the drawing again. It no longer looked prophetic. It looked ordinary. A man, imperfect, tired, human, and that terrified me more than the idea of destiny ever had. Because if the drawing wasn't magic, then what remained was choice, and choice has consequences. I thought about Ethan's words. I don't want to be someone's outcome. I had done exactly that, quietly, unintentionally, but undeniably. I had turned him into a conclusion instead of a person. The realization didn't come with drama, just a slow, aching clarity. That night, I sat on my living room floor, the drawing spread in front of me, and let myself feel everything I'd been avoiding: the grief of my past relationship, the fear of repeating it, the longing for something that didn't require certainty to be meaningful. I didn't cry when I tore the paper. That surprised me. The sound was soft, final. The pieces fell into my lap like snow. It wasn't an act of rejection. It was an act of release. I choose not to know, I whispered into the quiet room. I choose not to be protected from pain. For the first time in weeks, my chest felt lighter. The next morning, my phone buzzed. "Ethan, can we talk?" No expectations, just honesty. We met days later, not at a cafe, not at the festival grounds, but at a quiet bookstore downtown, neutral territory. No symbolism, just shelves and silence. He looked different. Tired, yes, but open in a way I hadn't seen before. He said, "I don't know if I'm good at this, staying, choosing, not running when things get complicated." "I'm not either," I admitted, "but I don't want guarantees anymore." He studied my face. "What changed?" I thought of the torn paper in my trash bin. "I can't prove it," I said, "just something I decided." We didn't resolve everything that day, but when we parted, there was something new between us. Not certainty, but space. And for the first time, I understood that love without guarantees isn't weaker, it's braver. I didn't know then whether choosing without signs would bring us back together, or confirm that some stories only exist to teach us how to let go.
The second fight sounded nothing like the first. This one had edges. We met on a Sunday afternoon, the kind that feels suspended between responsibility and rest. The bookstore cafe was nearly empty. Rain tapped against the windows in an uneven rhythm, as if even the weather couldn't decide what it wanted. Ethan sat across from me, hands wrapped around his cup, knuckles pale. "I've been thinking," he said, "and that's usually dangerous." I smiled weakly. "For both of us." He didn't smile back. "I don't know how to stay halfway," he said, "and I don't know how to leave without disappearing." My chest tightened. "Those aren't the only options." "They're the only ones I know," he replied, "and that's the problem." Silence settled between us again, heavier this time, charged. "I'm scared," he admitted finally. "Not of you, of what happens if I believe in this." "In us," I corrected gently. He nodded. "Yes, because last time I believed, I built my life around someone who slowly stopped choosing me." The words hit harder than I expected. I leaned forward. "And what do you think you're doing now?" He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "You're asking me to prove something you're not willing to risk yourself," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You talk about choice, but you're still protecting yourself from making one." His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "It's honest." For the first time, frustration flashed openly across his face. "You think I don't want this?" he asked. "You think pulling away feels good?" "You think," I replied softly,
That staying scares you more than leaving. The words hung there, undeniable. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing once before stopping near the window. I don't want to be another chapter you analyze later, another lesson, another story about growth. I swallowed. You're not. How do I know? He shot back. How do I know I'm not just the person you needed to prove something to yourself? There it was. The question I'd been afraid of since the drawing. I took a breath, a real one. I'd destroyed the only thing that could have made this easier, I said. He turned slowly. What do you mean? I reached into my bag and pulled out a small folded napkin. Inside it, I had kept a single torn fragment of the drawing, the corner with the scar. I tore it up, I said, days ago. His eyes searched my face, cautious. Why keep that piece? I told you I wanted to remember what I chose not to rely on. I didn't want certainty anymore. I wanted presence. He stared at the fragment, then back at me. You didn't tell me. I needed to be sure I wasn't doing it for you. I needed to do it for myself. He sank back into his chair, the fight draining out of him all at once. I don't believe in destiny, he said quietly. I know. But, he continued, voice rough, I believe in people who stay, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. My throat tightened. Then stay. Not because it works out, not because it's safe, just stay. He closed his eyes for a long moment. I can't promise forever, he replied. I don't want forever. I want honesty. I want effort. I want to be chosen, not predicted. He let out a shaky breath that sounded like surrender. I don't know how to do this perfectly. I don't either, I said, but I'm willing to learn with you. The rain outside intensified, blurring the city into watercolor streaks. Ethan reached across the table and took my hand, not carefully, not hesitantly, fully. And in that moment, I understood something vital. This wasn't fate versus choice anymore. This was fear versus courage. And for the first time, we were standing on the same side. I didn't know then whether this moment would carry us forward, or whether choosing each other once would demand to be proven again and again. Choosing each other once didn't make anything easier. It made everything visible. Without destiny to hide behind, without symbols or predictions, what remained was just us, two people with old fears, trying not to let them speak louder than the present. Ethan stayed. Not dramatically, not triumphantly. He stayed in small ways, in showing up when his instinct was to retreat, in answering messages even when he didn't know what to say, in sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it. And I learned quickly that staying is not a decision you make once. It's a choice you have to repeat, especially on the days when love feels heavier than hope. There were evenings when he was open, almost soft, his guard lowered enough for me to glimpse the man he might have been if loss hadn't taught him restraint. And then there were nights like this one. We were in my apartment. Rain pressing softly against the windows, the room lit only by a floor lamp in the corner. We hadn't spoken much all evening. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. You're doing it again, I said quietly. He exhaled slowly. I know. Then talk to me. I don't know how, he admitted. Every time things start to feel stable, something in me panics. I shifted closer, not touching him yet. Because stability feels temporary? Because stability feels like something I'll ruin, he said. The honesty in his voice startled me. I don't disappear because I don't care. I disappear because caring makes me feel exposed, like I'm one wrong move away from losing everything. I let that settle. This was the part of an emotionally mature relationship no one romanticizes. The moment when love stops being about chemistry and becomes about capacity. I can't keep guessing whether you're here, I said gently, and I can't keep proving that I'm not leaving. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the floor. I know, and I hate that I put you in that position. Silence followed. Not sharp, just heavy. I'm afraid. he said finally. Of me? I asked. No, he said immediately. Of what happens if I let myself believe this will last. I felt my chest tighten. What if it doesn't? He went on. What if I give everything and it still ends? I don't know if I survive that twice. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. What if it doesn't last? I echoed. Then it will still have been real and chosen, and that matters to me. He looked up then, eyes tired but searching. You're not afraid of wasting time, he asked. I'm afraid of wasting presence, of being somewhere without being fully there. That landed. He leaned back, rubbing his hands together, restless. I don't know how to promise you what you deserve, he said. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for honesty when it's uncomfortable. He nodded slowly. That night, he stayed. Not because his fear disappeared, but because he didn't let it decide for him. Still, choosing each other again didn't erase the pattern overnight. A few days later, he canceled dinner plans again. Short message, apologetic tone, no explanation beyond exhaustion. I stared at my phone longer than I wanted to admit. This time, instead of spiraling, I did something different. I waited. An hour later, he texted again. I'm sorry. I'm doing that thing where I retreat instead of asking for space. I typed back slowly. I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to stay in the conversation. 3 dots appeared. Can I come over? When he arrived, he didn't hover near the door. He took off his coat, sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. I don't want to lose you, he said, voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know how to hold on to something without gripping it too tightly or letting it slip. I turned toward him. Then let's stop thinking in terms of holding on and think in terms of showing up. He swallowed. What if one day I pull away and you don't follow? I asked. Then we'll talk about it, not assume the ending before it happens. He studied my face, as if searching for hidden conditions. You're really okay with no guarantees? He asked. I nodded. I'm okay with love without guarantees. I'm not okay with pretending. Something in him softened then, not relief, but recognition. That night, there was no grand resolution, no dramatic declaration, just 2 people sitting in the quiet, choosing not to leave. And I realized something important. Staying isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up the next morning, and the morning after that. But even then, doubt doesn't vanish. It waits. And I knew, with a clarity that felt terrifying and grounding, that the real test wasn't behind us. It was still coming. I didn't know then whether choosing each other again would finally teach us to stay, or whether love without destiny demands more courage than we were ready to give.
There was no final test, no dramatic moment where everything almost fell apart again. Life didn't ask us to prove our love with a grand sacrifice. It asked something quieter. It asked us to wake up the next morning and decide, again. Ethan and I settled into something that didn't have a name at first. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't security. It was presence, the kind that shows up even when the feeling fluctuates. Some mornings he was still distant, not absent, just inward. And instead of chasing that distance or filling it with fear, I learned to ask, "Are you here today?" I'd say. And he'd answer honestly, "Yes," or "I'm trying," or sometimes, "I'm struggling, but I don't want to disappear." And that was enough. We stopped pretending that love should feel steady all the time. We let it be what it was, a slow burn romance story shaped by awareness, not fantasy. One evening, weeks later, we walked through the same part of town where the festival had been. The lights were gone, the booths dismantled. The space looked ordinary now, smaller. I thought that place felt huge, I said. Ethan smiled faintly. It was, for what we were carrying. We stood there for a moment, hands brushing, not quite holding yet. "Do you ever think about the drawing?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not anymore." "That's good," he said. "I was worried it might haunt you." It taught me something," I replied, "but it doesn't get to decide anything." He nodded slowly. "I still don't believe in destiny," he said. "I know," I smiled. "But," he added, "I believe in staying. I believe in choosing to stay, especially when it's uncomfortable. I looked at him then, really looked at him, at the tired eyes that no longer felt guarded, at the mouth that was learning how to say what mattered, at the imperfect man who wasn't a prediction, but a decision. Then let's stay, one choice at a time. He didn't answer right away. He just took my hand, firmly, presently, without hesitation. And in that moment, I understood something that had taken me years to learn. Love isn't about being chosen by fate. It's about choosing, even when nothing is guaranteed. Especially then. I don't know what happens next. This story doesn't end with a wedding scene or a promise carved in stone. It ends with something rarer. Two people choosing not to hide behind fear. Two people accepting that love without guarantees is still love, maybe even the most honest kind. If this story stayed with you, if it felt familiar, if it stirred something uncomfortable or hopeful in you, thank you for being here. This is Possible Hearts. Real stories, real hearts, real possibilities. Before you go, take a second to like this video. It helps more than you know. Subscribe to the channel if stories about love, loss, forgiveness, and second chances speak to you. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, city or country. I read them, all of them. Maybe love isn't written. Maybe it's chosen. And maybe that's what makes it real.